Hi, everyone. Jim Crawford here for another podcast with the JC Law Business Law Podcast. I'm sitting here with someone that I know very well. His name is Peter Crawford, and he recently joined the firm. Hey, Pete, how are you?
Good, Mr. Crawford. How are you?
Good. What do you have to say for yourself?
I just want to introduce myself. Like you said, I'm Peter Crawford. I am somehow related to this man right here, and I'm looking forward to working with him in the law and creating a successful law firm.
Pete's a recent graduate of Widener Law School, and he's really looking forward to jumping in, rolling up his sleeves, and getting into what he needs to get into.
Absolutely.
Okay, today, guys, I want to talk about prenuptial and postnuptial agreements. I was sitting there last night, believe it or not, and I actually do think about these things at night, believe it or not.
I know.
And I actually live it. But I really believe that in our society across this country, you're going to see more and more of these type of agreements. As people change, and you can see it in governments and a lot of the laws across the state. Maryland just recently in October went to basically a no-fault state, as you know, meaning that you don't have to really establish a ground for divorce anymore. You could just say, hey, we went out, and that's the way it is. Now, it's always been there to a degree. But there's certain ramifications and requirements to make that to happen. But I see across the country the no-fault angle happening more and more. And, so many people over the years don't want government to be involved in marriages. And that's an argument for another day because what happens when you get married obviously becomes a contract, right?
Absolutely.
And the state enforces that contract. And so many people, young men your age, young women your age, even people my age, really don't know what they're getting themselves into when they get married many times.
No idea.
And so many of us, I think, are so befiddled with the concept that you fall in love and everything just works out, right?
Well, that's what we're sold. We're sold that love story since we're 5 years old. And it turns out relationships and people aren't necessarily like the movies.
Right.
And then 20 years goes by, you have kids with somebody, and they turn out to be somebody that you have no idea who they actually are. So that's when we come into play a little bit, and we either handle divorce, but the better thing to do is to get a prenuptial agreement and to fix things before things can actually go wrong.
Well, it's what my goal is, and I think yours too, and a lot of the lawyers here at this firm. And by the way, we are now the largest divorce family firm in the state of Maryland. And yes, we've been for a while, and as a result of that, we have some obligations, and that means to lead the way in many ways about these concepts. And my thoughts are that okay, if you're going to get married, how many people feel like dealing with the bullshit of going to a defense lawyer before you're even married and paying them to deal with these issues that are certainly going to be so uncomfortable talking to your spouse about? How many people are going to do it? There are some people that do it, but how many?
Not many. Not many, just because, like you said, it's very awkward to talk about. A prenuptial agreement is something, obviously, you have to bring up before the marriage. And during that time, you're still in love. You still are in that honeymoon phase. And to bring up something that could possibly end the marriage is something nobody actually wants to talk about.
Yeah, it's hard. And it's and I think that's one of the reasons why is my goal to kind of educate people about what needs to happen in these situations, but also to make it easier for this to happen. There are a couple services, and I won't mention their names, around the country, and I'm sure there's some in Europe as well, that you can actually go online and do a prenuptial agreement. I don't advocate that, and not because I'm a lawyer not wanting it to happen. I don't advocate it because you don't know what the hell you have at the end. I mean, no one's really looking over that agreement and saying, okay, this is how a court would interpret this or look at that and say it's valid or not valid. So I think you still have to have that human being, that lawyer, putting their hands on this and giving it the final touches. The problem is that if you go to most law firms, what's the time frame? You're talking what? 2-3 months.
At least.
Yeah, to get it done. And that's unacceptable because I think most people, when they get married, they think, oh shit, it's a month before the marriage, right? And I got to do a prenup. And to make it worse, a lot of the laws in the older states up and down the coast, if you spring a agreement on someone and you force them, then that agreement could have problems, unless you've talked about it over a long period of time and what have you. And even if you don't present it to them, but if you talk about the issues ahead of time, then that's certainly valid. So my goal is to try to put the public and the people that we work for, because we work for you, and this is a public service. You know, we're in the business of helping people with their legal needs. Is to educate and to also make it easier for this to happen. You know, we want you to be able to call our firm and really within 72 hours be able to spit out an agreement that is really mutually beneficial to all parties involved. And but it's scary for people.
It is. But like you said, they need it done sometimes within 72 hours, because if you wait too long, even the appearance of impropriety, the courts will say, hey, maybe this guy forced his wife into getting a prenup, meaning that we can't actually enforce this because it would be inequitable. It would be something that's not just. So in order to get it done quickly, sometimes you got to go to a lawyer. And the online sites, what they do is they spit out a form. And the form isn't tailored to your needs. It isn't tailored to your trust or your assets. And sometimes the language in there can just be so broad that it doesn't actually cover anything. So coming to an attorney like you or somebody at the firm is just, it's vitally important.
No, I agree. And it's so awkward and it's scary. So I came up with some just thoughts off the top of my head of why people should get a prenup and why you got to get over that fear. I don't care if it's the bride or the groom or whoever it is, you have to get over that fear and get this done. And the way that society is looking at marriage now, you know, divorce rates, I mean, are almost 50% across the board. I think the second marriage is like 60-some%, and the third is like unbelievable. It's like 70-some%, and it varies by state. And I think Maryland's actually not that bad. Maryland's actually down at the bottom as far as divorce rates are concerned. Although I tell you what, if you're getting divorced, we have so many of them, and also if you don't want to do this, you don't want a prenup, that's fine. Come to us because we'll handle your case, okay? Yeah. But the reality is that we want what's best for people, and we want people to make an educated decision. But what do you think, for example, if you have a young lady and a young guy who they just graduated from college, and they both want a career, and they want to get married because they love each other and what have you, and they are going to probably start a family, but they both want a career. What would you advise? I mean, you know, what do you think that person would be thinking in that situation, or both people?
Well, it's tough. Like we talked about before, when you're in that stage, you're in love. It's a new relationship. It's something that you're just starting out, but things change.
Well, do you think people actually think about these things?
No, I don't.
Yeah, and isn't that half the problem? I think.
Absolutely.
You know, if you know, because parents, at least like I've been divorced, and you know, in my second marriage, but my grandparents, none of them were divorced. You know, they all used to say like, "Suck it up and suffer like the rest of us," right? And I'm laughing about that because that's not necessarily true, but I'm laughing because there's some truth in that, and people did not or would not get divorced because it was more important for the family structure and the kids to be part of what the benefit of the union and what have you. And that's the way society looks at it. But I think in today's world, you have the bride and groom looking at their future, but not really looking at what's going to happen. For example, suppose both people want to be professionals, or both people want to, you know, work in the business world. Who's going to sacrifice their career in order to take care of the children? Right?
We don't know. Right. I mean, at least with Elise, my sister, she has a nanny, full-time nanny, and that can take care of a large part of the issue. But that's not for everybody. Some people want somebody within the marriage to actually take care of the kids, whether it be the father, the mother.
To work around it, yeah.
So it really depends on the family, but it's definitely a big issue and a contentious issue within relationships.
And my point is, I don't think that a lot of people, really consider what the sacrifices are about marriage and the fact of what they're going to have to do. And I think resentments occur.
So do you think not looking ahead is one of the biggest reasons people get divorced?
Yeah. I think in on top of all the subtle nuances that our society now has imposed upon people's thinking. In other words, what is the role of a woman in a marriage? What is the role of a man in a marriage? What is the role of the marriage itself? I can speak to this because of my age. I could say back in the 1960s, it was one thing, right? 1970s was something different. Now it's something totally different. And I'm not necessarily saying it's good or bad as far as that's concerned, but I do think that there's a metamorphosis, a major change in society happening as a result of that. Because people are thinking, but not everyone takes the time to think about that. But there is, there was recently an uptake in marriages recently. Then it went back down again. So, and the divorce rate, I think, plateaued in this country recently. But a lot of that's because a lot of people aren't getting married.
I think it goes back to gender roles too. So, like you said, back in the 1960s, 70s, gender roles were one thing. And there was a lot of assumed responsibilities within marriage that came with those gender roles. But nowadays, we've moved away from that gladly because equality and equality, between the genders. So
I get it.
With that, there's been a lack of understanding of responsibilities within the marriage moving forward, and that's really got to be discussion between you and your spouse of who's going to take care of the kids.
Well, I laid out a quick list that if you happen to be listening to this and you happen to be contemplating marriage, or even something we haven't talked about, a postnuptial, which is something can be done as well. But if you happen to be thinking about these issues, think about this. I made a little list. First of all, the idea of a prenuptial or postnuptial is to prevent future disagreements and arguments. Okay, when people have a in-depth understanding about what their roles are going to be, and things as little as like who pays for what, who takes care of the kids, who manages the house, how often do we go on vacations, things like that, right? I mean, so stop and think about why you're going to do this. So when you confront your spouse with this prenuptial, and you're going to see a couple different looks. I don't care who's confronted. First, you're going to see like a surprise, then you're going to see like some anger, then you're going to see some hurt, then you're going to see some bewilderment. That's a nice little package, isn't it? That's of different emotions. That's why you should really be talking about these things ahead of time. It should never just be presented. I mean, it should be something that is discussed, even if it's not in the form of a prenuptial, but just what roles people are going to be handling. The second is, I think it's something that's important. What if it's a marriage late in life? Aren't there different things that can pop up rather than a young couple getting married?
Well, what do you think? I mean,
well, I think absolutely. I think it's something that you have to consider. Someone my age versus someone your age getting married is a big deal. We have kids, right? And the other spouse has kids. What obligation do you have to those other kids? Is it financial? Is it just to hold their hands? What kind of, is it a good relationship, bad relationship? Is there resentment there? Stepchildren can be a big problem. And listen, I mean, stepchildren can cause a lot of problems in marriage. I've seen it. I've seen divorces where especially when the stepchildren are younger, they're like in 8, 9, 10, 12, teenagers, where they can plot and plan.
Well, tell me if I'm wrong,
devious
but I
things.
feel like at that point, the expectation of you being more of a father figure at that point is assumed a lot more than later in life.
It is. That's 100% correct. I mean, let's think about this. All right, so you're a male, and you're going to marry a single mom and has one child or more children. What is your role there? And what do you get out of that?
I have no idea.
Right?
I can't say. I don't have kids yet, but I'd assume that you'd want to step into that father figure role and take care of those kids, or at least the mother would want you to.
Well, there you go.
Or maybe not.
And there's nothing wrong. I don't think there's any right answer. What's right or wrong is, listen, I know many stepfathers that are fantastic and have great relationships with their stepchildren, and they play that role in that game very, very well. But what if it's not welcome? What if there's problems? Not every stepchild is just out there doing the right thing. It could be issues, drugs, acting out. Resentment is a big thing, right?
Or the biological father could come in and say, "Hey, I don't want you around my kids."
Right.
Could also be a big
So
issue.
you in one way, and this goes both ways, by the way, male and female. So you're expected to put time and love and energy into that stepchild, but it can be pulled away at any moment. In other words, you're supposed to devote and maybe act as a mother and give motherly advice and treat that child like a mother or a father. But then, like you just said, for some reason, they could just be ripped out from underneath. You could develop a relationship for years, and it could be done. So isn't that something people think about? In other words, why would I do that?
It's something they should think about, for sure. It's another responsibility that they could take on, and it's another issue or potential issue within a relationship that needs to be discussed before the relationship goes any further.
Yeah, and it's awkward because some of the emotions and things that you have to express really haven't been felt yet, unless you've been together for a while or what have you. So I think sometimes a therapist walking you through, and believe it or not, a lawyer walking you through this is really something you need to think about as you plan your prenuptial.
Absolutely.
The next thing on the list I have is money. Money, 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 money. We all need it. We all want it. We have to have it. It's something we got to do. I don't care if you have a lot of it or a little bit. It's important. You got to plan and budget. So if there are stepchildren involved, who pays for the stepchild? In other words, who pays for the college? Who pays for the education? Who pays for the food? Who pays for the gas? I think a lot of people, men and women, would say, "Oh, you know what? It's just shared. It's part of our marriage or what have you." But then suppose the other spouse does have their own children that they've got to provide for, and maybe they can't really pay for that. So this is one of the reasons I believe that it's such a high divorce rate in second and third marriages, because you have all these other factors. Most people who get married for the first time don't have children, so you don't have that factor.
I think the common scheme throughout the first and the second marriage is you don't plan beforehand. You don't talk about these things beforehand, because there could be issues that aren't the same as in the first and the second marriage. But again, if you don't discuss them and you don't understand each other and the expectations within that marriage, then that's when things go awry.
No, I agree wholeheartedly. So money, keeping your own checking account, your own savings, your own retirement, and isn't that really kind of totally against what we think about in society? Because Jimmy Stewart and Cary Grant, and you get married in the black and white movies, and everybody lives happily ever after. It's totally against what we believe in our society, but yet the reality is that many times it doesn't turn out well. An average divorce cost is anywhere between $25,000 and $150,000, depending upon what's going on. So spending a few $1,000s for a prenuptial could go a long way, guys, a long way. So money's important. Something else, debt. So I not you, but someone wants to marry me, okay? And I've been very responsible. I don't have much debt, and I do what I need to do, and I'm very careful, and I do this. But the person you married or going to marry has a lot of debt, and you love them, and they kind of were irresponsible. Who pays for that debt?
I'm not sure. Who does?
Well, I think it depends upon the people, but I would say that if you get married and you don't talk about it, I promise you this, it's going to be a problem. Okay, I can't make many promises in life. Yeah. It's going to be a problem because there's going to be resentment of when the husband's part. Now, from a legal standpoint, you're not necessarily, you can't necessarily inherit debt. This is not, England 1865 where there's debtor prisons. So if your spouse incurred that debt prior to the marriage, most of the time, it's going to be an independent debt from you, even though you're now the spouse. You can't say, well, we got married, therefore you inherited that. There's exceptions to that, but not many. So that's something that you really need to talk about.
Yeah, especially with student loans nowadays. I know, at least my generation, student loans is such a big deal because we're all in debt. We all have hundreds of thousands of dollars worth of college tuition that we have to pay off throughout our lifetime, and that's most of the time we have to bring that into the marriage. So discussing how we're going to pay that off and what's going to happen with that is going to be vitally important to create a good marriage.
You know, I think it was Mike Tyson who said, and he quoted, he said, you know, everyone has a plan until they get hit in the nose or hit in the face. And I think that's the case with people getting married. I think intellectually they think, well, we can deal with the debt, we can deal with this, we can deal with that. But when they get hit in the face with repossession or foreclosure or major debt issues, then all hell breaks loose.
Or they go through bankruptcy, and even with bankruptcy, student loans aren't forgiven.
Right.
So I mean, it's like, whoa, at that point, what do I do? Who do I turn to? And it's something that's going to be a big issue moving forward.
So I agree. Things like inheritance and other issues. You know, I'll talk about one more that I think is big, and that's alimony. You know, alimony in this country is still a big issue. It's something that the courts still have control of. Even with the no-fault divorces like in Maryland, alimony is still a big deal. You know, pending light alimony, temporary alimony, they call it rehabilitative alimony, which I never liked that term, and lifetime alimony. And so in many ways it's used as a tool, but in many ways, sometimes it's valid. So go ahead.
So during your practice, how have you seen the fault-based divorce, like adultery or excessively vicious conduct, how have you seen that been used in alimony arguments?
Well, it becomes a huge fault, becomes a huge part of the distribution of assets and our alimony. Now, I would say that lawyers push that many times more than frankly, a lot of judges really feel how important it is. I mean, and I can't speak for all Maryland judges and judges throughout the East Coast, but I do know a lot of them, we do talk. And I would say that many judges do not take the fact that someone may have cheated or has been unfaithful and slam them in a situation where all of a sudden now they're going to be hit like double with alimony or something like that.
But it's interesting because it is a contract that you made with somebody, and then you reneged on that contract by cheating or acting in a way that broke down the marriage.
But you know what the problem with that is this? The problem is that you signed a contract, but you don't know all the terms. It's kind of like some of the bills in Congress in the last couple of years. Here, sign this, vote for this bill with about 15,000 pages of piggybacked items on it, but yet this. I mean, when you agree to get married, do you really know the fine print?
No, I don't think anybody knows exactly what goes.
But yet you're held to it as if it's a contract. I mean, you really are, and that's part of the problem. The old ecclesiastic thought process about marriages is that, look, family was more important than individual prosperity or rights. In other words, even with situations where men found out that children are not their biological child, the courts in many ways, because of public policy, they said, listen, public policy says that child's got to be taken care of. Okay, and you're going to have to pay child support even though you missed this or missed that. That's changed a lot, but there's still an element of that could occur. I mean, for example, if you have a man who kind of figured out a long time ago that, two of his children are not his, and I see this all the time, but it's not worth it emotionally. He's vested his entire life with him and his wife into that situation, even though she may have never admitted that it was not his child, but he knows it's not his child. In fact, he may even know who the father is. I mean, I guess you could tell I'm talking about a couple cases I've had over the years, right? But if he does that and he takes no action, then under latches, he's basically in a situation where he's given up certain rights to go after that. Because remember, family law is a ecclesiastic, statutory-driven program. It's not a civil program. We try that. You can't just sue based upon it. Although I've tried to do that too.
So that's interesting, though. Does somebody who's in that position, are they then deemed the father, even if they're biologically not the father?
Well, what the courts are saying is we don't care. That because you took no steps you've raised these children, it's almost impossible that someone else is going to be held responsible for them as far as child support and raising them. That, listen, dude, you're in a position where you've waited so many years. Now, that's different than a situation where you may find out, suddenly. I'm not saying that a man can't change that scenario. In fact, it's become easier in some ways because of the DNA testing and things like that. Okay, but public policy rules a lot of things. Alimony. Back to what I was saying. So suppose you marry your wife and you have children, and she says, you know what, I had a career, but I'm going to stay home for the next 10 years and raise these kids, but I'm going to sacrifice my career. And then you decide to get divorced. Does she have a valid argument that, wait a minute, it's going to take me time to get back in the saddle and get back to where I was, or at least where I should have been by this time if I would have continued? Does she have a valid monetary alimony argument?
I think absolutely she does, especially for rehabilitative alimony. I think at that point, if she takes a year and a half to get back in the job market and to create a financial, in order to get back to the financial standpoint she would have been in if she would have continued that career, I think the court puts that obligation on the husband at that point, saying, listen, she gave up her career in order to contribute to the marriage in a non-monetary form, and you have to give back in a monetary form in order to get her back to that position.
I think it's a good argument, and that's in fact exactly what a lot of divorce lawyers argue. Now, here's my argument against that, or at least countering that. Your Honor, we're acting as if the ability to stay home and not have to incur income and take care of the children is a penalty. In fact, I would argue that the husband who had to work, and it could be vice versa, whatever, whoever it is, had to work and maintain the family household even harder to pay because they're less one paycheck, and was not able to really spend the time at home with the children, be able to wake up with the children and go, for walks or whatever it is, depending upon the age, that he's the one that should be compensated.
Because he lost that relationship with his kids.
Because he lost relationship, he sacrificed that. So it's interesting. There is no one argument that takes debate, but it is what it is. And guess what? If you sign a prenuptial, a lot of these things go away. You don't have these issues. You don't have lawyers like me jumping in and creating issues, because lawyers will create issues. Believe me, that's what happens in these things.
And who wants to litigate all these issues with your spouse? I mean, at that point in time, if you do have kids, putting your kids through trial and putting your kids through a huge divorce, or having to argue with your wife, it's not worth it. It's just not.
It's not, but it's a fact of life, and it's something that can be avoided. Even if you take just a moment or two to try to do that. So guys, even if it's not JC Law, somebody, go to a lawyer ahead of time, okay? But find a lawyer that knows what the hell they're doing, okay? There's a million lawyers out there, and very fine lawyers, I'm sure, a lot of good lawyers in the practice of law, and but I believe that it's our duty to really give the best possible service to the public we can. And that means somebody who really understands and knows what to do regarding these prenuptials. Someone has to guide you. You meaning the client. You don't want to be telling them what you want. You want someone to say, what about this, what about that, what about this, what about that?
Yeah, lay the option in front of them, right?
Lay it out. And also understand the emotional components of what could happen here and how it could happen. I've seen some we've done some really weird prenuptials over the years for celebrities, athletes, things like that. I mean, you can have things in there such as the amount of vacations.
Well, protecting trust and assets are usually a big deal with athletes and entertainment and possible future income. That's a big part of it as well.
So you need a lawyer that can come up, that can talk about some unusual things. if you read the book about Jacqueline Onassis, okay, when she remarried, he was a billionaire. One of the terms that she won in her negotiations with a prenup was that for every year that she was married to him, she was given $10 extra million.
It's a hell of a deal.
Yes, yes. So Onassis won that one. So there's all kinds of things that can be put into prenuptials, and I think at the end of the day, if you've listened to this, and I hope you enjoyed it, the walk away understanding is really think about getting this done prior to marriage. It's uncomfortable. It's something that you may not feel good about. But if your spouse reacts negatively, that's probably something you should consider in your future as far as being with that person, I think.
Absolutely, absolutely. Especially just if you take anything away from this conversation, just take away the fact that you have to set expectations in a relationship and you have to talk about things before you go into something. Because I think that just is a recipe for disaster when you don't know what the future is going to look like, when you don't know what the responsibilities with the relationship are going to look like, especially with those gender roles changing within society. So I think if you get anything out of this conversation, that's something you got to take from here.
Well, thanks, guys, for being with us. Just want to remind everybody that these discussions and the words we speak and the things we discuss are not, in fact, legal advice at this point in time because we don't know enough about your particular situation, and they're not considered advice at all. So hope everybody has a good Halloween. In fact, we're having a Halloween party later on today. I guess we have a bunch of people coming and bringing their kids. They're getting dressed up. What are you getting dressed up as?
Top Gun.
Top Gun?
Maverick.
Maverick? Okay, all right.
Yeah.
I might have to be John Adams again from last year.
Guys,
good. Thank everybody. We'll see you next time.
See you guys.